Everyone in the ballroom saw him walk away from her, and not one of them was surprised. Alina stood near the gilded pillars, the golden light catching the crystal beads on her gown, making her shimmer like something precious. But the Duke of Winford had just turned his back on his wife as if she were a servant he had dismissed. His tall figure moved through the crowd with quiet authority, never glancing back. The whispers began before he had taken 3 steps. "Did you see that? He cannot bear to stand beside her. I heard he only married her out of pity. Her family was drowning in scandal. She looks so lonely, poor thing." Alina heard every word. She kept her chin lifted, her gloved hands folded, her eyes fixed on the distant chandelier. She would not cry. She had learned that tears only made the whispers louder. She stood alone, surrounded by silk and laughter, feeling as invisible as a ghost at her own wedding feast. That was the night she finally stopped hoping he would ever look at her with anything other than cold indifference. The memory of their marriage was still a raw wound she touched only in the dark. 2 years ago, Alina Vance had been the daughter of a baron whose name had become a warning. Her father had gambled away every acre, every jewel, and finally, every shred of honor. The debtors circled like vultures. The worst of them was Lord Harwood, a man with a soft smile and eyes that stripped a woman bare. He had made it clear that the only currency he would accept from the Vance family was Alina herself. She had been only 20, terrified, her mother ill with shame. Then, without warning, salvation appeared. Alexander Ashford, the Duke of Winford, a man she had seen only once from across a crowded theater, cold and remote as a winter star, sent his solicitor with an offer of marriage. No courtship, no sweet words, just a contract. In return, all debts would be settled, her family protected, her future secured. It had felt like a miracle. She had signed with a trembling hand, believing that beneath his frost there must be some hidden warmth. Surely a man who offered his name to save a stranger could not be heartless. But the wedding day shattered that hope. He spoke his vows with a voice like granite. At the small private ceremony he did not smile. That night he led her to a separate bedchamber, bowed, and said, "You will have everything you need. Do not expect more." The door closed, and she had stood there in her ivory nightgown, listening to his footsteps fade down the corridor. For months afterward, she woke in that vast, silent room and wondered if she had dreamed the whole thing. Still, she tried. She arranged his favorite flowers in the study, though he never commented. She learned his preferences for tea, the exact temperature of the water, the precise shade of amber in the honey. She wore the colors he once mentioned in passing, a deep emerald that brought out the gold in her hair. She sat through dinners where he read his correspondence and answered her gentle questions with monosyllables. She endured the pitying looks of servants, the veiled mockery of society ladies. She smiled and she waited, and she told herself that time would soften him. Time would teach him to see her. But the ball that winter killed the last flicker of that dream. It was the grandest event of the season, hosted by the Marquis of Dunmore. Alina had spent hours preparing, hoping that if she looked beautiful enough, graceful enough, he might finally be proud to have her on his arm. She had descended the staircase of Winford Hall in a gown of midnight velvet, pearls woven through her upswept hair. For a moment she caught his gaze. He looked at her as one might examine a painting. No warmth, no light. Just a brief, clinical assessment before he turned and walked to the carriage without offering his arm. At the ball, he had left her near the refreshment table with the words, "Mingle, I have business." She had stood there, a glass of lemonade growing warm in her hand, as the hours crawled past. Then she saw him across the room, deep in conversation with Lord Ashby, an old friend. Drawn by a desperate need for some connection, any connection, she had moved closer, hoping he might introduce her, might acknowledge her existence. She heard his voice before she reached them, low, dismissive, final. "My wife is nothing but a duty, Ashby, a necessary burden. Do not mistake this arrangement for affection." The words did not stab, they hollowed. Alina felt something inside her chest collapse, a quiet implosion that left nothing behind. She turned before he could see her and she walked, not back to the pillars, not back to the lemonade. She walked out onto the terrace into the biting winter air and stood there shaking until her skin went numb. No one followed. No one noticed. That was the night her love began to die. Quietly, without protest, it folded itself away. She returned to the ballroom, collected her wrap, and informed a footman that she was feeling unwell and wished to return home. The Duke did not accompany her. He sent word later that he would remain at the club. She lay in her cold bed and made a decision. If she was nothing but a duty to him, then she would become a duty she could bear to look at in the mirror. She would stop chasing a ghost. The change was gradual, and at first no one observed it. Alina stopped sitting in the breakfast room at dawn, hopping to catch a few minutes with him before he left for his rides. Instead, she took her tea in the morning room overlooking the East Gardens, reading books on estate management. She stopped sending little notes to his study. She stopped asking the cook to prepare his favorite dishes. When he dined at home, she was polite, placid, but absent in a way that was hard to name. She smiled a small, closed smile, answered questions with grace, and excused herself early. She no longer lingered. The void she left was quickly filled with a new purpose. Alina began visiting the tenant farms on the Winford estate. She walked the muddy lanes in sturdy boots, a wool cloak wrapped around her, and she listened. She listened to the farmers' wives speak of sick children and leaky roofs. She listened to the laborers' concerns about unfair wages. She wrote letters to the steward, organized repairs, and started a small school in the village for the younger children. She taught them their letters herself, sitting on a wooden bench with a slate in her lap, their eager faces turned up to hers. For the first time since her wedding, Alina felt something other than pain. She felt useful. She felt seen not as the Duke's ignored wife but as herself. The villagers began to call her the kind Duchess, and the name spread. She did not hear it, but the servants did. The steward noticed, and eventually the Duke noticed too. Alexander Ashford was a man who had built his life on control. He controlled his emotions, his expressions, his words. He had learned from a brutal childhood that love was a weapon others would use against you, and that the only safe heart was a hidden one. When he first saw Alina Vance, 2 years before their marriage, she had been dancing at a country assembly, her laughter bright and unguarded. He had watched her from the shadows, a dangerous warmth stirring in his chest. He had wanted her with a hunger that terrified him. Then came Lord Harwood. The man was a serpent. He had bought up Baron Vance's debts with the express purpose of forcing Alina into a ruinous arrangement. Alexander discovered the plot through his network of informants. Harwood did not merely want money. He wanted possession, domination, revenge against a woman who had once refused his advances. Alexander knew that if he openly courted Alina, showed any sign of affection, Harwood would destroy her reputation with forged letters, paid witnesses, scandals so dark they would cling to her forever. The only way to protect her was to make her seem worthless to his enemies. So he married her with cold formality, kept her at arm's length, and waited for the day Harwood would slip. He thought he was saving her. He did not realize he was breaking her instead. The first crack in his armor came 6 months after the Dunmore ball. He returned from a week in London to find the house changed. The quiet was the same, but Alina was not waiting in the entrance hall as she once had. He asked the butler where the Duchess was and received a calm reply. "Her Grace is at the village school, Your Grace. She will return before supper." The village school. He had not even known there was a village school. Curious and faintly unsettled, he rode out to see for himself. He dismounted near the small stone building and peered through the window. She was sitting with a child on her lap, helping the little girl trace letters on a slate. Her hair was simply pinned, a strand falling softly by her cheek. She was laughing, a sound he had not heard in over a year. The child giggled, and Alina's whole face transformed. She looked radiant, alive, and utterly unreachable. Something twisted in Alexander's chest. He told himself it was only surprise. He returned to the hall and said nothing. That evening at dinner she was as composed as ever. He studied her across the table. She wore a simple dove-gray gown. Her eyes, once so full of earnest searching, now rested on him with a calm, distant courtesy. She asked about his journey. He answered briefly. She did not press. She finished her soup, placed her napkin on the table, and excused herself with a soft good night. He stared at the empty doorway long after she had gone. The weeks that followed were a quiet torment. He began to notice her absence in ways he could not name. The breakfast room felt colder without her there, even when he had never truly spoken to her in the mornings. The study seemed larger, emptier. He would walk past her sitting room and hear her soft voice reading to one of the maid's children, a practice she had started to help the servants. She never glanced up when he passed. She never seemed to notice him at all. Then Dr. Henry Atwood arrived. The young physician was newly settled in the district, a man of gentle manners and kind brown eyes. He had heard of the Duchess's work and offered his services to the village clinic she was trying to establish. Alina accepted with gratitude, and they began meeting regularly to discuss health plans for the tenants. Henry Atwood was everything the Duke was not. He smiled easily. He listened. He looked at Alina as if she were the sun rising over a dark landscape. Alexander saw them together for the first time in the garden. It was late afternoon, the light honeyed and soft. Alina was pointing to a patch of herbs, explaining their uses. Dr. Atwood bent his head close to hers, and something he said made her laugh, that same bright sound he had heard through the school window. The doctor took her hand briefly in thanks for a cutting of rosemary. His thumb brushed her knuckles. She did not pull away. A cold, possessive fire blazed through Alexander. He stood at the library window, his hands clenched behind his back, and watched as another man made his wife smile, made her laugh, touched her hand. He wanted to stride out there, send the man away, demand that Alina come inside. But what right did he have? He had made her invisible. Now someone else had seen her. That night he found himself standing outside her door. He did not knock. He listened to the faint rustle of her movements within, the soft melody of a lullaby she was humming. He had not known she could sing. The realization hit him like a blade. He knew nothing about her. He had pushed her away so thoroughly that she had become a stranger living under his roof. He sought her out the next morning. He found her in the still room, grinding dried lavender with a pestle. She looked up with mild surprise. "Your Grace, is something the matter?" The title, so formal, so polite, stung. He hesitated. "I thought we might take tea together, in the south parlor." She blinked, and for a fleeting second he saw a shadow of the old longing cross her face. But it vanished, replaced by a gentle, untouchable calm. "That is kind of you, but I have promised Dr. Atwood I would help him sort the medical supplies at noon. Perhaps another time." She was refusing him, quietly, gracefully, without rancor. She was refusing him for another man. He nodded stiffly and left. As he walked away, he heard the pestle resume its steady rhythm, unbroken, unbothered. The Duke's jealousy grew like ivy, silent and strangling. He began to watch her more closely. He noticed the way she lingered in the village longer than necessary. The way Dr. Atwood's name appeared in her conversation with easy familiarity. He saw the doctor's horse tethered near the garden gate twice in 1 week. Each sighting was a small, sharp reminder of everything he had thrown away. The first emotional rupture happened at a small country assembly. The local gentry had gathered, and Alina attended, not on her husband's arm but with the vicar's wife. She wore a rose-colored gown that gave her cheeks a soft flush. Alexander arrived later alone, his presence drawing the usual hushed respect. He found her near the card tables, talking with Dr. Atwood. The doctor's head was inclined toward her with an intimacy that made Alexander's jaw tighten. Lady Catherine, a sharp-eyed widow who loved nothing more than stirring trouble, appeared at his elbow. "Your Grace, your wife is blooming tonight. Quite the transformation. It seems the good doctor has been a tonic for her spirits. How fortunate she has found such a devoted friend." The words were syrupy, barbed. Alexander turned a cold stare upon her. "The Duchess has always been devoted to the welfare of this estate. Her friendships are her own concern." His tone was a door slammed shut. But inside he was burning. He watched Eleanor place her hand on Dr. Atwood's arm as she rose, guiding him toward the refreshment table. He saw the doctor's expression, open and admiring, and he saw Eleanor smile, a real smile, soft and unguarded. She had never smiled at him that way, not once. He did the only thing his pride would allow. He walked away, but this time the distance did not cool his blood, it boiled. Days later, the Duke made a clumsy attempt at kindness. He arranged for a new pianoforte to be delivered, knowing she had once played beautifully. He had heard her practicing in the early months of their marriage, the music hesitant and sad, until she stopped entirely. The instrument was placed in the music room, a magnificent creation of rosewood and ivory. He mentioned it to her at dinner. "I noticed the old instrument was out of tune. I had it replaced." Eleanor set down her fork, her face unreadable. "That was generous, but I no longer play." "You played often when we first married." "Yes, I did." Her voice was soft, final. She did not explain. She did not need to. She had played to fill the silence, to reach him through the walls. She had stopped because he had never responded. He felt the weight of her unspoken words like a stone on his chest. "Perhaps you might find pleasure in it again," he said, his tone more urgent than he intended. "Perhaps." She gave him that same distant smile. "But there is much to do in the village. Dr. Atwood and I are organizing a fund for widows. It requires a great deal of planning." The doctor, always the doctor, Alexander's hand tightened on his wineglass. "You spend a great deal of time with the man." Her gaze lifted, steady and cool. "He is a friend to those in need, and he is kind." Kind? The word was a quiet indictment. He had never been kind to her, not truly. He had been cold, distant, dismissive. He had called her a burden within her hearing. He had left her to wither. And now, faced with the evidence of her quiet healing, he had nothing to offer but a piano she did not want. He rose abruptly. "I have letters to write." He left her sitting alone at the long table, the candles flickering between them. But this time it was not she who felt the sting of abandonment. It was he who carried the hollow ache into the night. The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon a fortnight later. The Duke was in his study, pretending to review accounts, when his steward knocked and entered with a troubled expression. "Your Grace, there is a matter I think you should know. It concerns the Duchess." Alexander's head snapped up. "What is it?" "Dr. Atwood has been making inquiries about leasing a cottage on the northern edge of the estate. He mentioned it might be suitable for a small household." The words fell like a hammer. A cottage, a household. The implication was unmistakable. Dr. Atwood was preparing to settle permanently, and everyone knew his attachment to the Duchess. Had Eleanor entertained the thought of leaving, of accepting a life with a gentle country physician, far from the cold halls of Winford? The very idea sent a surge of panic through him, so fierce it left him breathless. He dismissed the steward and sat motionless for a long time. The rain lashed the windows, the fire crackled, and for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Alexander Ashford faced the truth without his armor. He loved her. He had loved her from the moment he saw her laugh across that crowded room 2 years ago. He had loved her when he signed the marriage contract, when he watched her walk down the aisle with hopeful eyes. He had loved her when he pushed her away, when he spoke those unforgivable words. He loved her now, and he was losing her. He was losing her to a kindness he had never shown, to a warmth he had never offered. That evening a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from his solicitor in London, and the news it bore was the key he had been waiting for. Lord Harwood had been arrested on charges of forgery and fraud. His network of spies and threats had collapsed. The man would rot in prison, his power shattered. Eleanor was safe. She had been safe for weeks, perhaps, while Alexander continued his self-imposed exile from her heart. He read the letter 3 times, then set it down with a trembling hand. He had waited so long for this moment, believing that once the danger passed, he could finally reveal the truth and win her. But now, faced with the wreckage of his own making, he realized how late the hour had grown. She no longer waited for him. She no longer hoped. The truth might not be enough. It might be too late. He found her in the library, sitting by the window with a book open in her lap. The rain had stopped, and a pale evening light touched her hair. She looked up as he entered, and for once, he did not bother to mask his agitation. Eleanor, her name, spoken without the formal "Your Grace," made her eyes widen slightly. "I need to speak with you, please." She closed the book and folded her hands. "Of course." He crossed the room but did not sit. He stood before her like a man facing judgment, his composure frayed to threads. "There is something I must tell you, something I should have told you long ago." His voice was rough, unpolished. "The reason I have been cold, distant, it was not indifference." She said nothing, her gaze steady, guarded. "Before we married, your family was in grave danger. Lord Harwood intended to ruin you. He had forged letters, false testimonies, a plan to destroy your reputation utterly if he could not have you. He had spies watching your every move. If I had shown any public affection for you, if I had treated you as my true wife, he would have unleashed a scandal so vicious you would never have recovered. I thought," he paused, the confession tearing through him, "I thought I was protecting you. I married you quickly and quietly, and I kept you at a distance so the world would believe you were nothing to me. So Harwood would believe his threats had no power over you. I thought I was saving you from pain. I see now that I only inflicted a different kind of wound." Eleanor's face had gone very still. The color had drained from her cheeks. When she spoke, her voice was a whisper. "You made me believe I was a burden, that I was nothing to you. You let me stand alone at balls, you let society mock me, you called me a necessary duty. You let me break Alexander." Her use of his name, raw and trembling, shattered him. He dropped to his knees before her, all pride abandoned. I know what I did. I thought I was being strong, but I was a coward. I was afraid that if I let myself feel anything, I would lose control and bring danger down upon us both. I heard my own words that night, and I have hated myself for them every day since. I love you, Eleanor. I have loved you hopelessly since before I had the right. I loved you from the first moment I saw you, and I was too terrified to show it." Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and slow. "You loved me, and you let me suffer. You let me think I was unworthy of even the smallest warmth. I know I have no defense. I can only tell you the truth now and beg you to believe that my coldness was never a reflection of your worth. You were never a burden. You were my only light." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small, leather-bound book. He held it out to her with a shaking hand. "This is my private journal from the weeks before our marriage. I wrote down every foolish thought, every hope. I sketched your face from memory because I could not sleep without seeing it." He opened it to a page where a rough but tender sketch of a young woman's profile lay beneath a line of ink. The words read, "She laughed today. I would burn the world to keep that sound safe." Eleanor took the book with numb fingers. She traced the drawing, the faint lines of her own young face, captured by a man who had never once smiled at her. The truth crashed over her in waves. He had hidden this. He had hidden all of it behind walls he thought were protecting her. She looked at him, kneeling on the carpet, his silver eyes wet with tears she had never seen him shed. The Duke of Winford, who never bowed, was broken at her feet. "I loved you too late," he whispered, "but I have loved you all the same." The silence between them was heavy, filled with the ghosts of every lonely night, every swallowed sob, every small death of hope. Eleanor closed the journal and held it against her heart. "I do not know if I can simply return to what I was," she said, her voice breaking. "You starved me of affection for so long that I learned to live without it. I built a life that did not include you because including you hurt too much." He nodded, his head bowed. "I will accept whatever you choose. If you wish to leave, to take a cottage by the sea, to find happiness with someone like Dr. Atwood who can give you the open love you deserve, I will not stand in your way. I will provide everything you need. I will set you free if that is what you want. But I had to tell you. I could not let you go without knowing that you were always adored. Even when I seemed made of ice, I was burning for you." Eleanor stared at him, and in the quiet of the library with the last light fading, she saw not the cold Duke, but a man who had been so afraid of loss that he had caused it himself. She thought of the piano, the little notes he had started leaving for the cook to prepare her favorite dessert, the way he had begun to linger in doorways, the jealousy in his eyes when he saw her with the doctor. The signs had been there, small and bewildering, but she had been too wounded to trust them. She thought of Dr. Henry Atwood, who was kind, yes, but who had never made her heart race the way a single glance from Alexander could, even in her deepest pain. The love she had tried to kill was not dead. It was only sleeping, bruised but breathing. She rose from her chair and extended her hand. "Get up," she said, her voice steadier now. "You may kneel in prayer, Alexander, but never to me. We are equals in this ruin. If we are to rebuild, we must do it together honestly, without walls." He took her hand, his grip warm and desperate. He rose, and when he stood before her, he did not hide his tears. He let her see them. He let her see everything. "I will spend the rest of my life earning your smile," he said hoarsely. "Every sunrise, every sunset, every small moment you deign to give me." She did not smile yet, but she did not pull away. "Then start now. Tell me everything. Leave nothing in the shadows." And he did. He spoke of his own lonely childhood, his parents' bitter marriage, the scars that had taught him that love was a vulnerability to be concealed. He spoke of seeing her at that assembly, the way his heart had lurched, the way he had stood frozen in the corner, unable to approach. He told her of Harwood's threats, the false letters, the paid informants who watched their household. He revealed that he had secretly paid off her father's debts months before the marriage, anonymously, so that her family would not know the extent of the humiliation. He told her about the portrait he had commissioned of her from a miniature painter, a tiny likeness he kept in his pocket watch, close to his heart. He had never shown her. He brought it out now, and she stared at the tiny painted face, her own eyes looking back from a world where she had believed herself unloved. Alina listened, and her heart, so carefully guarded, began to thaw, not all at once but in small, painful cracks. By the time the candles were burning low, she had cried, and he had held her gently as if she were made of spun glass. She let him. For the first time in 2 years, she let him. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. Trust, once shattered, does not mend overnight. Alina did not rush back into his arms. She continued her work in the village, but now the Duke accompanied her, quietly, without fanfare. He stood at the back of the schoolroom and watched her teach. He helped the steward repair a tenant's roof with his own hands, dirt on his fine coat, and did not complain. He invited Dr. Atwood to dinner and treated him with stiff but genuine courtesy, swallowing his jealousy because he saw the doctor was a good man who had been a true friend to his wife. Henry Atwood, perceptive and graceful, understood the change in the air. He accepted the invitation, wished them both well with a gentle, knowing look, and soon after announced his intention to take a position in Bath. He left with no bitterness, only a quiet hope for their happiness. The turning point came on a crisp autumn morning. Alina stood in the garden, the same garden where Dr. Atwood had once touched her hand. Alexander walked toward her, a small velvet box in his palm. He did not kneel this time. He simply opened it, revealing a ring that matched the simple gold band he had given her on their wedding day. This one held a single pearl, soft and luminous. "This is not a replacement," he said, his voice low. "It is a promise, a new beginning if you will have it. I want to marry you again, Alina, not out of duty or protection, out of love spoken aloud, witnessed by the world. No more shadows." She looked at the pearl, then at him. The lines of his face were softer now, less guarded. His eyes held that same desperate hope she had once worn herself. She thought of the long, cold years, but they seemed distant now, like a storm that had finally passed. The garden was quiet, the leaves turning gold, and she realized she was no longer the woman who had stood alone at the ball, invisible and breaking. She was stronger, and he had become someone who could stand beside her. She took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Yes," she said, and the smile that bloomed on her face was not the careful, polite smile of the Duchess. It was the smile of a woman who had learned to live without love, and then, against all odds, had found it waiting for her when she was finally whole enough to receive it. He cupped her face in his hands and he kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then, softly, her lips. It was not a kiss of passion but of reverence, of gratitude, of a promise kept. They stood together in the garden as the sun climbed higher, and the halls of Winford, once so silent, seemed to exhale a breath it had been holding for years. The servants, watching from the windows, smiled and turned away. The village hummed with the news that the Duke and Duchess had found their way to each other at last. And in the still room, the piano that had gathered dust began, very tentatively, to sound a few notes again. Not the hesitant, sad melodies of the past, but something new. Something that sounded, finally, like home.